Welcome to the channel. So, decided to go out and have a nice little picnic slash hike for this one, as should everybody. One of the New Year's resolutions that everybody should have, in my humble opinion, is to go out into the wilderness more and to reconnect with nature, touch grass, all of that good stuff. And I think it's important because if you don't do that, you lose touch with reality, and very seldom does that ever have a positive effect on you mentally and spiritually. And it's just good to go out and to enjoy nature while we still can, because there's people in this world that want to take that away from us, want us to be separate from nature, want us to all be conglomerated and packed into 15-minute cities and be nice and controlled. And I think it's important that we remind ourselves what there is to lose. But that is not the topic of today's video. The topic of today's video is the tax protest that's allegedly going to happen this year. It's all over the internet. People are so upset. They're all saying that they're going to stop paying taxes and they're not going to file and until the government gets its poop in a group. And the way that I wanted to address this is from a place of, relative sympathy, because I myself do not think that taxation is a moral thing that happens in society. I think it's absolutely an immoral thing. It funds immoral things, but the fundamental basis of the libertarian stance against taxation from a moral perspective isn't focused primarily on the idea or the issue of what taxation is actually utilized for, what it pays for, but rather the act of taxation in and of itself. So one of the things you can do to sort of point out the sort of contradictory and coercive nature of taxation is simply going up to the nearest person and asking them, do I have the right to tax you? And then typically you get these weirded out answers, and the people kind of tiptoe around, tap dance around the question, and they say, oh, well, no, you need to have the proper blah, 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 and you have to do this, that, and the other thing, and it's and all that. And then you follow up the conversation, you follow up the question with, well, if I don't have the right to tax you, how do I obtain the right to tax you? And so usually the follow-up answer to that question is something pretty close or pretty akin to the initial answer to the first question. But then you can flip that question around and you can ask, well, how did Congress get the right to tax? And either at that point you get silence or you get another explanation of, well, it was ratified by the blah 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 amendment to the Constitution and therefore it's legitimate and blah blah blah. But you finally end up at a place, if you steer the conversation in the right direction, you end up at a place where the final answer to the question, how does one obtain the right to tax, is one that doesn't have an actual satisfactory answer to it. Usually it revolves around, well, a couple people agreed that taxation is okay, or that in this instance, taxation is moral, and taxation with representation and so forth. So therefore it's legitimate. But when you bring it back down to the level of the individual, and you ask the person, how can I obtain a right that I don't have originally? You inevitably, invariably, if the person even puts in the effort to answer the question, they're going to resort to some heavy-duty mental gymnastics to try to justify it. And it's obvious that that's the case, because in matter-of-fact reality, there is no such thing as the right to tax. Nobody has the right to go to their neighbors and demand payment under threat of violence or under threat of imprisonment and getting thrown in a cage. And everybody knows that. Everybody knows that if an individual were to come up to them and demand payment, they would laugh them off the street, and if they were to try to collect on that payment by force, then they would be shot, likely, and rightfully so. But the propaganda and the generations of people who've been fed the same propaganda over and over again, that taxation is legitimate and that it's necessary and that it's, civilization would not exist without taxation, etc., so forth. And we end up in the place where we are today, where the vast majority of people think that taxation is legitimate and that it's necessary, and that if done the correct way, there's nothing wrong with taxation. Now, I am here to tell you, if you are one of those people that says, oh, I'm going to stop paying taxes until everything gets figured out, and then I'm going to happily start paying taxes again because we need taxes, blah, 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 same stuff, right? I want you to think about the actual moral principle behind what you are saying. What you're saying is that it's actually absolutely okay for this giant organization, giant totalitarian organization, to determine how much of your rightfully owned money, rightfully earned money, is theirs to take. And I want you to ask yourself, is that actually a moral condition or a moral situation to be in? Do you have a moral obligation to pay that arbitrary amount that organization has declared that you have to pay? And then if the answer is no, then perhaps there is a different issue with taxation other than just the idea that sometimes taxes are used for things that are inefficient or what have you. Perhaps the act in and of itself of taxation, the involuntary taking of the rightfully owned resources of other people, is the evil in and of itself. And perhaps the motivation for refusing to pay taxes and to have this 2026 tax revolt shouldn't even be the idea that the taxes are used for stupid, inefficient, immoral, etc. things, but because the act in and of itself is immoral to tax, to force people to pay for things that they may or may not agree with. I think that should be the motivation, and not so much the motivation of, well, my taxes are being used for all these different things that don't benefit me. Yes, that's bad, but it's also bad when you get forced to pay for things whether you like to or not, because that is the entire problem. That is the root of the problem, not what the taxes are used for. That's still a problem, but it's not the root of the problem. And then the last thing I'll leave you with is a quote, which I'm not sure who I could thank for this quote, but it goes like this. If taxing somebody at 100% is akin to slavery, at what percentage does it stop being slavery? Is it at 100%? Or excuse me, is it at 99%? Or is it at 98%? Or is it at 90%? Or is it at 40%? Thanks for watching.